Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the second of my 2024 year-end lists. Today I'm talking about the top 10 best hit songs of 2024. As always, it's just my personal opinion, but just to go over the eligibility rules first, the song has to have made it to the US Billboard year-end Hot 100 chart for 2024, and it cannot have made it already in a previous year. So that leaves us with 82 eligible songs. I already did a worst list. It's on my channel. If you want to watch that one, I would recommend watching it before you watch this one. It doesn't mean you have to watch that video in order to watch this video, but I would recommend if you do plan on watching both to start with the worst list because of spoilers. There will be more spoilers for that list in this video than vice versa. But yeah, same eligibility rules for that list as this one. 82 eligible songs. I think in terms of popular music in 2024 on this list, it was probably a pretty average year. I do think maybe there were like the songs that I left off the top 10 weren't as hard to leave off the list. I do have 7 honorable mentions that I'm going to go over first. Songs that I like, yeah, I think the honorable mentions are not super strong. There weren't a lot of songs that were really in serious contention for this list. I think last year there were a few more that I was kind of considering putting on the list that I had to leave off. Not as much the case this year. So yeah, we'll start with the songs that I thought were pretty good, but had some notable flaws that kept them off the list, or just didn't really stand out to me enough to make the top 10. But still, there were other good songs too that I left off the honorable mentions. But yeah, just not songs that necessarily I'm going to be going back to all that much, probably. But it really depends on the song. I have 7 honorable mentions, which I will go through in randomized order, starting with. At this point, it's basically tradition that Bailey Zimmerman makes it onto my honorable mentions without actually making the top 10, and it often seems to be for different reasons with each song. I'm pretty sure this is only the 4th Bailey Zimmerman song that I've heard, and all 4 of them have been good, but not quite great in my opinion, with this one falling into the category of being a really good composition with some really underwhelming production, similar to Fall in Love, which should have been an honorable mention for me in 2022, I'll say that looking back at it. Now, the production here isn't nearly as messy as that track, but the writing also isn't nearly as good. But look, I do still like the admittedly quite amateurish chorus, and I'm not quite sure why, because this is the kind of thing that I would usually find really annoying because of the awkward pauses in the instrumental momentum. But Bailey Zimmerman is a really good singer and seems to be able to make the otherwise generic songs work quite well. And I also think the lyrics do have some bite to them, where he calls out an ex who didn't really love him despite despite him giving this person a second chance. And he eventually just reaches the realization that he needs to just get away from this person for good, and that's the best thing to do. Now, I do kind of wish there was more lyrical detail here to really give this a lot more impact, but on the other hand, I can also kind of get behind the idea that this is more ear candy than any sort of actual meaningful piece of art. At the end of the day, it all depends on how you hear it, I guess. And this is where I really wish the production hit a lot harder. The drums are way too clunky, and as much as I do like the guitar solo and the bridge, I just really wish it fit more in the mix. And I also really wish Bailey's vocals were more emphasized, because again, he's a really good singer, and this is the sort of song where the venom should really be why it works, and emphasis on should be because, like I said, this is mostly ear candy to me. But it didn't have to be. And unfortunately, it's not the kind of ear candy that I think I'm going to be going back to much, mostly because of the production issues. I do really like the vocal melodies, and the bass at least has a nice presence that kind of saves the song, but only barely. One of these days I'll probably listen to a full Bailey Zimmerman album, but while the potential is clearly here, I'm not sure I want to set my expectations too high. Alright, so here's a spoiler alert for this list, which will not be at all surprising if you saw my worst list. Billie Eilish is not appearing on this list. 2 of her songs made my dishonorable mentions for my worst list, and the other one is Birds of a Feather, and no, even that song's not going to make it. Now tell me, are you more pissed about that or the fact that Good Luck Babe is not in the top 10? Because look, this is going to be topping lots of best hit songs of 2024 lists. It's probably one of the most critically acclaimed singles of 2024, not just the hits. And look, I do at least sort of get why. It's got the kind of production that actually brings me a bit of nostalgia for 2020, and believe it or not, that's actually not the reason this missed the list. Yeah, 2020 sucked, but I can still appreciate nostalgia for that year's pop music, where a lot of the biggest hits took obvious 80s influence. It was kind of the year I got into pop music too. And I do like the synthesizers in this song quite a bit, and it honestly sounds a little bit like a Christmas song to me. Maybe it's just because it's really reminiscent of Last Christmas by Wham, I'm not sure. Or maybe it's the time of year right now, or a combination of both. But the point is, I can get behind this sound when done well, and here I can absolutely see the appeal, especially when Chappell borderline knocks it out of the park on the vocal front, and it's easy to get lost in the glamour of the chorus. Enough that you almost forget that this is an overly clingy breakup song where the whole point is, oh, you don't really want to be with him, do you? You secretly still want me, and I know it. And this might be kind of hypocritical of me after putting Thinking About Me at number 2 on my worst list last year, but when done with the right kind of melodrama, I can get behind this concept in the context of a song some of the time. And the weird thing is, this is one of those cases where I don't totally mind it, and maybe it's because I like a lot of the vocal phrasing and the way the lyrics just sound good when sung. Seriously, the chorus of the song has been stuck in my head nonstop, and I'm not complaining about it. And it leads me to wonder if the problematic lyrics are even the reason this isn't fully clicking with me, or if it has more to do with some of the vocal production not really colliding well with the percussion, or that weird drum section in the bridge, or the sort of unnecessary outro, although the latter of those I keep changing my mind on, and part of me thinks it kind of works. But look, at the end of the day, something's just not quite working for me here, and I haven't fully figured it out yet. And honestly, I was really disappointed that we didn't get more Chappell Roan on the year-end Hot 100. I wasn't the biggest fan of the rise and fall of a Midwest Princess, but Pink Pony Club is a really good song that I thought was going to make it, probably just barely missed. And I even mostly like Red Wine Supernova, and it's a real damn shame that Casual flopped as badly as it did, because that song is legit great. Instead, we just got this song and Hot to Go, the latter of which won't be on this list, as it mostly sounds like an early 2010s Charlie XCX leftover, pun not really intended. But still, let's hope Chappell Roan sticks around in the mainstream, because she's a lot more interesting than a lot of today's pop stars. So believe it or not, I went the vast majority of this year without hearing this track, despite it being the second biggest hit of the year, and the biggest hit of the year in Canada, where I grew up and still live to this day. Now, I also wasn't familiar with Tipsy by Jaquan before this, but after listening to it now, I can't say I think it's all that good. But Shaboozey interpolated Tipsy to make a much better song in my opinion, and it's a sort of country song that has enough pop elements to appeal to a much larger audience, without sacrificing what makes me like country music so much. And I haven't even fully figured out what that is yet, aside from country twang, and I'm not even sure exactly how to describe what that is, or I'm not even sure I know what it is myself. But I do want to talk a little bit about why this isn't making the top 10, and it's a few things. For one, the whistling at the start of the song really didn't need to be there and is a little bit annoying. Yes, it's very brief, but whistling is a big pet peeve of mine in music. Secondly, the dynamics are a little awkward throughout the song, such as how the bridge suddenly loses all energy, and while I think it was intentional, it does kind of throw off the pacing a little bit. And I also wish the percussion were better, especially as someone who cares a lot about percussion and music. The hand claps sort of make this feel more like a campfire song than a bar song. But speaking of which, I do think it's worth mentioning that I actually recently got a new job working at a pub, and I think it's part of the reason this song appeals to me at all, because I've started to get to know that environment a little bit more. And really, I think bars are probably more about community than drinking. And yet it sort of reveals a sad reality that some people have become so dependent on alcohol due to loneliness. And this song really gets that conflicted emotion around regular bar drinkers. It's a celebration, but there's also a real sense of sadness that lingers in the tone of the track that I think was essential to making this song work, at least when there are those issues in the instrumentation that I mentioned. And also, this song is catchy as hell, I should mention that, and especially after hearing this song at the pub that I work at, I think it sort of cemented the song's placement here. A little too messy sonically to be in the top 10, but still a really good song regardless. I like this a lot. This song should be way better than it is. And it's not even that I think it's bad or even mediocre. If I did, it wouldn't be an honorable mention. But it's one of those songs that does so much so well and is completely ruined by one thing, which very well could be considered a nitpick. In fact, even I myself would probably call it a nitpick, and yet sometimes that's enough to kill a song for me. Look, before we get to that, I will say the idea of this song totally works. The narrator and her partner are planning on starting a new life together in a new city, which they've both been on the same page about for some time now, and it seems like it's all but done. And then said partner bails without giving any sort of explanation and is never heard from again. And Dasha perfectly mixes feelings of bitterness with empathy, where she wants to give this person the benefit of the doubt, but also can't help but be pissed, and understandably so. And part of this is in the lyrics, but also the vocal performance, which is really strong and perfectly conveys the emotions that I think the song was clearly aiming for. And I do really like the stomping percussion and the acoustic guitar, and the two go better together than you'd expect, at least on the surface. Because, yeah, the one thing that I was talking about that completely kills the song for me has to do with the sound quality. Or even just saying the production doesn't feel accurate because the vocals are really well placed in the mix, and the instrumental timbres do fit well with each other. But look, I'm no expert on music production, so I'm not really sure how accurate this is. But I think the best way I can describe it is that the higher frequencies are so goddamn annoying here. And yeah, I know that's a nitpick, and I can often overlook stuff like that. But in a song where the tone and the vibe is so important to it having enough emotional impact, it just really feels like it was all for nothing, especially when it sounds this rough. I think this probably could have used a low pass filter, or maybe I'm completely wrong. Again, I don't know how music production works. But in that case, the song might have been amazing. As it is, it's just pretty good, and that's really a shame. Sabrina Carpenter is one of a handful of artists to make both the best list and the worst list for me this year, at least if you include honorable mentions as part of the list. And look, I didn't really like Short and Sweet very much as an album. I thought it was significantly better than the painfully bland Emails I Can't Send, but that's really not saying a whole lot. And this is one of 3 songs from the album to be eligible for this list. And I never liked Espresso at all, and while I mostly like Please Please Please, it also does kind of fall into the category of over-polished pop music, which isn't nearly as charming as I think it was supposed to be. Now that's not to say that taste is without its problems. In fact, this song has soured on me a bit since I first heard it, to the point where this almost missed the honorable mentions. But look, I do still remember hearing this for the first time, and this being the opening track, and being pleasantly surprised by how much energy this brings to open the record, with the bitterness of the lyrics being really immature, which is maybe part of the reason this has shrunk on me a bit since I first heard it. But I also think Sabrina can pull this off a lot better than the average pop star, and it's actually kind of the reason why I've always liked this song. I mean, look, the immaturity is absolutely the point, where she clearly isn't over her ex and is trying to find the stupidest reasons to make his new partner jealous, because it's what keeps her feeling somewhat okay about the breakup. And look, I've always felt like the production could have given the song more punch. I mean, the drums themselves are pretty strong, and the bass stands out in a good way, but I wish the guitar and synths had more force to them, which would really help drive forward the bitterness that the song is aiming for. I mean, at the very least, it does make me at least a little bit more curious to hear some more music from Sabrina Carpenter, even though I don't want to set my expectations too high. Because again, the album was incredibly mediocre. This was just an exception. But again, I don't think this song is great, but it does show that she's got more in her arsenal than I was expecting. So even though it's been harder and harder to revisit, I do still think this deserves a spot here. Pretty good song. So I very briefly mentioned the Kendrick Drake beef in my worst list, and really as someone who isn't very educated on the situation much at all, I think it's just best I keep my mouth shut at this point. Yeah, I found it entertaining hearing some of the punchlines that Kendrick threw at Drake in his diss tracks, including Not Like Us, which includes lots of standout quotables. Certified lover boy, certified pedophiles, wop, 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 dot, fuck 'em up, wop, 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 I'ma do my stuff. Trying to strike a chord and it's probably a minor. What OVO for? The other vaginal option? Pussy? But even though I finally did a brief bit of research, I just feel like I'm way too out of the loop to really know what to say here, and I want to be careful with how I discuss this beef. And I also realize that only time will tell how Kendrick and Drake's diss tracks have aged as more information comes out. But for now, I can say that Not Like Us is a really goddamn catchy song with an awesome sped up sample from Monk Higgins, dun, 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 and a really catchy chorus too. They not like us, they not like us. I don't love the outro, and again, we will find out in time how well or how badly this has aged, but it was definitely iconic to say the least. Alright, so this definitely isn't the most original song ever. It feels like the sort of empowerment anthem which we've heard a million times before, and also heavily samples I Look Good by Charlie Boy. And I'm not entirely sure the sample fits with this instrumental. And look, I'm not sure why, but I swear I've heard that horn melody before. It's probably just from this song, because it did come out a while ago, and I just hadn't really listened to it knowing what it was until recently. But also, it might just be similar to other things I've heard. I know the horn melody wasn't a sample, at least I don't think it was, but Look, I do still like the horn melody, and it sounds really good in the mix, even if the bass sounds a little awkward and mushier than it probably should, and the percussion could have been stronger at points too, with the clicking timbre not always fitting with the more anthemic vibe of the production. But look, Victoria Monet can sell this kind of song with the confidence that really shines through in her vocal performance, and I do quite like the chorus, even with the heavy interpolation. Victoria Monet is an artist who I haven't really listened to much, but this definitely piqued my curiosity. Maybe I'll have to give that debut album of hers a shot at some point soon. So I mentioned there being a few artists on this list who were also on the worst list, including one of the singers who collaborated on this country song. Now I'll admit she's not really the main reason that this is here, and I'm not sure how much replay value this is going to have for me in the long run, but I can still appreciate what it does well. So as of right now, this is the only Koe Wetzel song that I know. I'm not sure if I'd heard of him long before this came out. I think I heard about another song that he put out, but anyway, the point is, I do really like his vocals here, and he conveys that sense of bitterness where you don't know if it's aimed at himself or the other person. And while I'm not a huge fan of Jessie Murph as a singer, she definitely sounds a lot better here than on Wild Ones, and I think her verse is really important to the song, showing another perspective where she suspects her partner is cheating and threatens to do the same if it's proven true, and yet she also acknowledges that she doesn't know, and thus it's a really tricky situation to navigate. And she has really good vocal chemistry with Koe Wetzel, and a mix that really gives the guitars a lot of weight, and the drums sound great here as well. And I like that they both acknowledge that it's probably best to leave this relationship in the past, even though no one really knows whose fault it is, and maybe it doesn't even matter at this point. Now, I will say that the song's title potentially playing as a pun for DUI, yeah, that's questionable, but I do take it as more of a metaphor. And look, this is not the most original country song I've ever heard, even in the mainstream, no, not even close. But again, the vocal chemistry is really good, and I also do really like the chorus. And in large part, it's because the instrumentation really sounds legitimately really good. So look, I'm not sure how memorable the song's gonna be, but it's a nice song, I'll give it that. This song, on the other hand, will absolutely be memorable, and you might be surprised that it isn't higher on the list. And look, part of this may just be me being out of the loop and mostly avoiding the situation which prompted the song to be a thing in the first place, but I can still acknowledge its place in rap history, and it's basically an instant classic. So like I said earlier, I think the best thing I can do at this point regarding the Kendrick and Drake beef, at least for now, is just keep my mouth shut. And that's kind of hard to do when I'm making a list of my favorite hit songs of the year, and one of those songs is on the list, and I'm supposed to be giving explanations for why these songs are here. But look, I am still going to keep this one brief, and this was the moment in the beef where Kendrick warned Drake that he wouldn't like the result if he responded, and I think we all know what happens from there. And yeah, there is that name mix up toward the end of the track, and the song does take a little bit to really get going, but once it does, it's really impressive with the great instrumental and Kendrick's great flows, and there are lots of really clever lines throughout, and I like a lot of the details, such as how Kendrick mentions liking Drake's R&B music, but not buying it when he acts tough. And the whole thing is pretty much portraying Drake as an actor who isn't what he appears to be on the surface. Now, I don't know whether or not everything Kendrick is saying is true, but that's where we get into a complicated conversation, which, again, I don't feel fully qualified to talk about. And this is definitely a very memorable diss track, with probably my favorite part being the chilling outro where he sends that final warning to Drake with that sound he makes where he goes, ooh, and it's haunting as fuck. And there are also a lot of great beat switches. Oh, and also the actual outro where he tries to revoke Drake's N-word pass and is really funny. Okay, so I forgot that this album came out, and I never even listened to it, but when going through this year's hits, I was pleasantly surprised by this one. So before I talk about this song, I do feel like I should address the elephant in the room. Yes, the allegations made against Metro Boomin are very disturbing, and while I'm not going to pretend to know more than I do, there does seem to be some evidence which really doesn't look good for Metro's case. And this definitely does make it feel kind of gross for me to say this, but I do really like Metro Boomin's production on this song, and I'm going to keep this segment to be discussing the song itself, which is a really eerie trap song where Future gives one of his best performances on any song that I've heard by him. Admittedly, I haven't heard much of Future's music, but still a compliment. But this is mostly here due to the production, as well as Travis Scott's verse, which really makes this track all the more haunting. And then there's Playboy Carti, who actually sounds like he wants to be there, unlike on Carnival. And look, I'm not really sure what this song is about, but it is absolutely a vibe, and I love how crisp the trap snare sounds, and Carti's flows really brought a lot more energy to the track while still keeping that low-key vibe which makes the eeriness really stand out, with so many spooky synths, and the beat switches are really great too. Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot to say about this one, but it was definitely an interesting song that I like a lot more than the majority of trap that becomes big in the mainstream, so I guess I'll take it. Alright, so some people might get mad at me for this one, but I can't deny how much fun this song is for me. Yeah, I've seen the memes and jokes about Anthony Fantano giving Sexy Red such a positive review, and I've personally never listened to a full project of hers, but Get It Sexy really surprised me when I finally listened to it in preparation for these lists. And look, as far as I can tell, there's not really a whole lot to this, at least if you're looking for lyrical depth. But come on, this goes hard. Sexy Red actually brings a lot of personality here, with a very memorable delivery and some really great standout lines, and that chorus is infectious. And I love that thick bass line that pairs super well with the trap beat, at least in the context of this carefree anthem where Sexy Red is just gonna be herself regardless of what everyone else thinks. And if I'm trying to be as objective as possible, the production here is kind of a mess, technically speaking, at least I think so. But look, it just fits with the vibe so well. And it just kind of works where, in this song, she's just trying to be her authentic self. And it's like, you know what? Who cares if it's technically good production? I think it sounds really good, fitting the vibe at least. And, I'm not really sure there's a whole lot else to say about this one. It's a lot of fun, and I'm curious to hear more from Sexy Red. Great song. I'm just realizing now how little of 21 Savage's music I've actually listened to, and while I haven't loved all of what I've heard by him, he is an artist I'm curious to listen to more, especially because of songs like this. I'm not sure there's a more menacing song to make the 2024 year-end Hot 100 than Red Rum by 21 Savage. It's a sort of venomous trap song, which is instantly memorable and will get stuck in your head easily. And I'm not complaining, because this song is great. It starts out with a sample of Serenata do Adeus by Elza Lariniera. I'm sorry, I probably mispronounced that badly. And it's a really haunting sample when placed in this production. And then the beat kicks in, and it's awesome. And to fit such a menacing vibe, 21's delivery here is really striking, and those gun sounds make this even more terrifying. Perfect for Halloween. And while there aren't a lot of individual lines that stand out to me all that much, although I do really like She Got Way More Bodies Than My Old K, the rhyming is really strong, and the whole thing adds up to create what is, once again, a very terrifying track. And I love how subtly threatening it is for him to repeat the word red rum over and over again. I mean, I think most people probably know what that word means, and if you don't, you can probably figure it out pretty quickly. And look, I'm not exactly sure what this song is about, although it really seems like there are some people who 21 is sick and tired of. And while this could get into questionable territory with how threatening he's being, I cannot take it seriously because of how spooky it sounds. Again, it's got a very Halloween vibe to it. I don't know, I still feel like I have a lot of learning to do around gangster rap, and I may be completely missing the point, so take what I have to say with a grain of salt. But one last thing I want to say, I do find it very entertaining the way he says the word pussy, especially considering how much he says it during this song. I mean, again, I may be misunderstanding this song, but I definitely really like it. I think it's a really fun track. Great stuff. Alright, the only real disappointment here is that we didn't get more songs from this album on the year-end chart, because there were multiple great singles on this album, and for some reason this was the only big hit. But whatever, I'll take what I can get. I'm legitimately a little bit shocked how good Beyonce's country album from this year was. And I mean, I liked most of what I had heard when I went through her other albums, including her 2022 album Renaissance, which was kind of a prequel to this album, but it was also very different and about the furthest thing from country. And here we get arguably the most country song on the album, with the twangy guitars, the stomping percussion, and the sort of groove that you'd expect to hear in a movie soundtrack or commercial or something like that, and in a very country way. And of course, there's also the lyrics where she sings about dive bars, gambling, and a real life hoedown. And look, aside from the swearing, this seems like the sort of country song that would have been a big radio hit in, I don't know, the 1950s. And I think that may have been the point. And for what it is, it's a ton of fun. I really like Beyonce's vocal delivery here. The percussion is really sharp and keeps the energy. And while it could have done without the whistling, that is pretty much my only complaint here. And again, that groove is sick. And I also do like how the lyrics, disguised as just a typical dance country song, actually seem to show Beyonce encouraging the listener to be their authentic self. Which really does make sense considering the fun dance vibes of the song, because sometimes being your authentic self is the first step to just having a good time. And the vocal layering is really strong, the melodies are really good, and I really like the outro with the keyboards. Not quite my favorite song on Cowboy Carter, but still a great country hit that I'm glad became popular. I'm not gonna lie, I forgot about this song until I was going through this year's hits in preparation for this list, and I'm not entirely sure why. Maybe it's because the album was overly long, so I didn't remember all the individual songs super well, or maybe it's because it wasn't that big a hit and I've never really heard it on pop radio. But whatever it was, I'm really glad this became a hit, and even though I forgot about it, that doesn't make it any less great. So I'm not sure what the actual inspiration behind this song was. Luke sings about an older brother in the song, although he never actually had any siblings in real life, and he didn't even write the song. But one thing I've noticed about Luke Combs is that even when he isn't singing a song that he wrote, he finds a way to make a song his own, and it feels like it's coming from the heart. Probably because it is. And this is a heartbreaking and also heartwarming story about the narrator's brother and the memories they've made with each other, where the older brother moved away to start a new chapter in his life, and while they stayed in touch, it sort of felt like it would never be the same again. And then the brother suggests that he move there as well, and eventually he does, and they spend a lot more time together before the narrator eventually decides it's time to move back home, as hard as it was to say goodbye to his brother. Because at the end of the day, his brother would always be there for him, or so he thought, because that's when you get to the final chorus, where the brother dies in a motorcycle accident. And it's another reminder to cherish the time with those closest to you, because you never really know what's going to happen. But also, this does feel more like a celebration of the brother's life than a sad song about his death. And again, even though this obviously wasn't Luke's story, he still makes it his own, and you can hear the emotion in his voice. And of course, the production is great too, but that's not really the point. It's more about the storytelling and the fact that the melodies really give this the perfect sense of melancholy and simultaneously a feeling of joy, and it's really hard to pull that off this well in the same song. But yeah, it's one of the best songs from Luke Combs' 2023 album, possibly one of his best ever songs, although it's got some tough competition. Either way, though, an absolutely fantastic country song that I'm so glad became a hit. And speaking of country songs, look, I didn't forget the song existed, nor did I forget that it's great, but I do think I kind of forgot just how great it is. Because look, if there's a country song this year that almost feels too good to become a hit, well, I don't remember caring all that much for Chris Stapleton's album last year at all. That is, aside from White Horse, which has always been my favorite song in the album and is easily one of the best country songs to make it to the year end Hot 100 in the past few years. And probably my favorite country hit of 2024. Actually, definitely my favorite country hit of 2024. There's so much to love about this song, and it's one where I don't even think it's worthy of analyzation because it's just such a banger. Yes, the production is fantastic with those rugged guitars adding the right amount of crunch along with Chris Stapleton's excellent vocal performance that's also placed perfectly in the mix. And don't even get me started on those drums. Not only the timing and the rhythm of the drums, but they sound so incredible in the mix. And I love how many musical sections there are to this song, with the semi laid back verses, the epic chorus, the dramatic tension building in the intro, and there's also that delicious guitar solo, which is the cherry on top. And I like how the movie esque fairy tale never comes true because the narrator isn't ready for that kind of commitment. And that might be all the more beautiful after all, hence the euphoria of that anthemic soaring hook. But look, at the end of the day, this is a pretty simple song. At least that's the way I see it as a non expert. I'm not a particularly great musician myself, so I don't have a ton of knowledge about what goes into writing a song. But this does feel way more like something that would have been a big hit a few decades ago, not in 2024. And the fact that this actually made the year end chart still kind of blows my mind, and I'm not complaining at all. Ironically, it kind of feels like a fairy tale and makes me wonder what else might be up Chris Stapleton's sleeve in future albums. Because even if he ain't there yet, this was pretty excellent all the same, and it will probably continue to be regardless. So there wasn't really any question for me as to what two songs would top this list. In fact, at one point, I thought this was basically a shoo-in to be number one, until I realized that a certain other song, which we will get to shortly, was going to make the year-end chart, but we'll talk about that soon. What might be most surprising to me, though, is that the world was so surprised when these two artists collaborated on a song together. I mean, to me, it just felt like a matter of time when you consider the stark parallel between their music. I mean, seriously, listen to the last few albums that these artists each made and tell me you don't hear the similarities. But look, I am personally much more of a fan of one of these artists than the other. And considering a really strange internet trend this year, when I saw the title of this song, I was a little bit worried, I'm not gonna lie. And they proved me wrong. Oh my goodness, did they ever prove me wrong. So you may remember, I didn't love the Tortured Poets Department as an album, and I was eventually planning on reviewing the second disc of that album, or at least talking about it in some form, but Then I just ran out of time, and now I'm scrambling to get these year end lists out, so I will just quickly say here I found it mostly inconsistent, similarly to the first disc, and while there were a few great songs, I just didn't love it overall as a whole. But anyway, Fortnite might be one of the most chilling, most unrepressed, and coldest songs of Taylor Swift's entire career, where the cheating husband is most likely not the ex described in the song, partially because of the pronouns, but also because, well, this is an ex, not a currently cheating partner. And there's nothing here that even portrays the ex as being in the wrong. Yeah, she's bitter as fuck, but this song isn't about looking at the situation objectively. It's just pure emotion. And yeah, she gets brutally honest, and it is not pretty, as she holds absolutely no punches and even admits to wanting to kill her ex's new partner. And while it's all a fantasy, you also really get the sense that she actually feels this way. Not that she's actually going to do it, but that her problematic side is getting the best of her internally. And this is where the song gets so staggeringly personal that it almost feels wrong to even have a guest star, until you realize that while Post Malone could be playing any of a number of roles in this song, the desire and emptiness is there all the same, whether he's the ex who secretly still has feelings for the narrator, or maybe someone else entirely talking about the narrator, or somebody completely different. And I think it really highlights just how problematic we can all be at our worst, at least when you look internally at your true self. And that outro, which might be where the desire becomes the most striking and haunting, well, look, there's a part of me that thinks it would be kind of funny if it were Ohio instead of Florida. If you know, you know. But jokes aside, that sense of longing and yearning and knowing that it's not going to turn out the way either character wants it to, yeah, I think it's the right way to end a song like this. I mean, the whole thing is toxic, and Taylor would probably admit that. But sometimes it's not as hard as it should be rooting for the antihero. And I haven't even yet mentioned the functioning alcoholic line, or the great two opening lines of the second verse, or how fantastic the production sounds. Again, I'm surprised this didn't end up topping the list, which brings us to. Let's talk about relatability in music, because it's something that I've often struggled to grapple my opinion on. I mean, on the one hand, aiming for relatability can really get listeners to engage with the art on a personal level, and that's its own conversation about how music affects us emotionally. But there's also the part of me that feels like a lot of pop artists rely too much on relatability, which can take away from the uniqueness of the art, especially when so much of it is so surface level and not really meant to connect with the listener, rather to sell more records because maybe a larger audience will get something out of it, before then forgetting that it exists and moving on because it didn't really have that big an impact on them in the first place. But then the radio will continue to play it, and the label will probably continue to make a lot more money off of it in the future. And I'm not really sure how I'm supposed to feel about this song in terms of relatability, because on the one hand, this song very much feels like it falls into that latter category. But it also has the added context of being written and sung by one of the most famous people in the entire world right now. And considering the song's subject matter, it makes me wonder how relatable it even is, because there are very few people who can even remotely understand what that level of spotlight is like, and I'm absolutely not one of those people. But hey, I can still acknowledge when somebody knocks a song out of the park, such as. This is my favorite song on the Tortured Poets department, and for a while I didn't even think this was going to be a big hit. I mean, it feels like a bit of a weird song to hear on the radio, and when it seems so designed to be so relatable, that feels weird to say because, well, isn't that exactly what you'd expect to hear on the radio? I don't know, maybe it's just me expecting to hear the upbeat, flashy pop songs, which this kind of is, but also Taylor is really good at pulling at your heartstrings when she wants to. And again, when you think about the added context that this is Taylor Swift, probably the biggest pop star in the world, and pretty much all eyes are on her, yeah, you have to think the stakes are a lot higher. And look, I could try to analyze what this all means in the larger context of the album, what the album represents, and Taylor being as famous as she is, of course. But I don't want to ignore how good the writing is, with the callback to Mirrorball, which is probably one of my favorite songs in Taylor's discography, and the specific melodic and lyrical phrasing, which go really well together, making this very memorable and quotable, even though it's not typically the kind of song where that's the main point. And honestly, as much as this song seems to be aiming for relatability, it also feels unique in the sense that this feels like a song only Taylor Swift could have made. Few artists can take such a depressing song and turn it into a kooky, laughably melodramatic, and, like I said earlier, quotable song, where the melodrama is very much there, but you can also hear the genuine pain and emotional weight that's fallen on Taylor. and it's simultaneously heartbreaking while also giving a real sense of, oh well. In other words, I think this song works for the same reason why I'm such a big fan of Lord's 2017 album Melodrama, where the idea of melodrama is questioned because, well, doesn't it sort of affect us the same as real drama, whatever that even is? Because otherwise, why is the melodrama even being acknowledged? And I especially look at a song like The Louvre from that album, and I can't help but wonder if Taylor was listening to that during the writing process. And as someone who loves that song, I mean that as a huge compliment. Again, I was not expecting I Can Do It With a Broken Heart to be the big radio hit off of the album, and it still feels a little weird to me now, although I also do kind of get it. Regardless, it's an absolutely incredible song. I'll have more to say about it in another upcoming list, so stay tuned, but for now I'm comfortable calling it the best hit song of 2024. So there you have it. Now I've gone through all my favorite and least favorite hit songs of 2024. I'm still planning on making 3 more year-end lists. I definitely want to do the top 50 best albums and the top 50 best songs. I'm hoping to get them out before the end of the year, but we'll see about that. I know this video was a little bit rushed too, although I wanted to put a little bit more effort into it than the worst list because these are actually good songs. But yeah, aside from that, I'm curious to hear your opinion on my list and also what your list is of the top 10 best hit songs of 2024, or however many you want to list. And yeah, I think that's pretty much all I have to say for now. Thank you for watching. By the way, it's December 21st as of right now when I'm recording this, and I'm not sure when it's going to be up. I've already recorded the worst list, and that's not even on YouTube yet, so I'm hoping to have both of these videos out in the next few days, although I'm not sure yet. We'll see when that ends up happening. But yeah, wishing everyone happy holidays. Thank you for watching. I will see you again soon.